The mental health early intervention process, ensuring positive housing outcomes for social housing tenants and applicants experiencing mental health difficulties. The mental health early intervention process has been prepared by the Housing Agency to assist local authorities and approved housing bodies to support tenants and housing applicants that may be experiencing mental health difficulties. A task group was established to develop the process, which included representatives from the Housing Agency, the HSE, local authorities and approved housing bodies.
Meet Jane. Like you, Jane works in a local authority or approved housing body. And like you, Jane interacts with local authorities and approved housing body tenants and housing applicants. Sometimes Jane has concerns about a tenant or applicant, but doesn't know how to help them. Jane now uses the Mental Health Early Intervention Manual. This manual helps guide Jane on what to do when she has concerns about a tenant's mental health. Jane is more confident helping a tenant where there are concerns around mental health. The manual sets out an early intervention process which Jane can use to identify and act on concerns regarding a mental health difficulty a tenant may be experiencing and have a positive outcome for the individual. The Early Intervention Manual sets out 5 standardised questions which can be used to identify the best course of action to take. We will be going through these 5 standardised questions in more detail later on.
Understanding of mental health.
What is mental health? Mental health is an essential part of your overall well-being, being comfortable, healthy and happy. Mental health is more than the absence of mental ill health, but is something that everybody experiences over their lifetime. It is normal and natural to feel down at times. Problems you may encounter might range from general everyday worries or low periods in your life to more serious long-term conditions. Well-being may be compromised when negative and painful emotions are extreme or very long-lasting and interfere with the person's ability to function in daily life. Everyone is different, and how we respond to mental health difficulties can vary from person to person.
Myths versus facts.
Now we are going to look at some of the common myths around mental health and what the facts are. Myth: mental health difficulties only affect a few people. Fact: mental health difficulties are common. 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health difficulty. Mental health difficulties are present at any point in time in about 10% of the adult population. Myth: mental health difficulties are caused by a personal weakness. Fact: a mental health difficulty is not a character flaw. It is caused by genetic, biological, social and environmental factors. Seeking and accepting help is a sign of strength. Myth: people with a mental health difficulty are violent. Fact: people with a mental health difficulty are no more violent or dangerous than the rest of the population. People with a mental health difficulty are more likely to harm themselves or to be harmed. Myth: people with mental health difficulties should be kept in hospital. Fact. With appropriate treatment and support, people with mental health difficulties can live successfully in the community. The majority of people with mental health illness live independently in the community.
Overview of interactions on housing.
Now we are going to look at interactions you may have with tenants and applicants around housing. As a staff member employed by a local authority or by an approved housing body, it is highly probable that you will have regular interactions with people experiencing a mental health illness, which you may or may not be immediately aware of at the time of the interaction. Tenancy interaction can be broken down into two categories. 1. Pre-tenancy interactions. 2. Tenancy interactions. Now we are going to look at the early intervention process and the standardised questions. If you have a concern following an interaction with a tenant or housing applicant, this concern needs to be assessed to determine an appropriate course of action. The objective is to get support to that tenant or applicant as early as possible, to prevent or reduce the severity of negative housing outcomes. The appropriate course of action can include the following. 1. No action required as no negative housing outcomes identified. 2. The staff member resolves the concern directly. 3. The staff member refers the concern to an appropriate staff member or team within the organisation. A series of 5 standardised questions have been developed to assist staff to establish the action required to deal with a concern. These questions, when applied to a concern and followed sequentially, should lead the staff member to the appropriate response. These questions are designed as a general guide to staff and are not designed to 1. Cover every scenario where there is a concern regarding mental health, or 2. Replace existing protocols that may be in place within your organisation. There are 5 standardised questions which are grouped into 3 assessments. Number 1, risk assessment. Number 2, responsibility assessment. And number 3, action assessment.
The early intervention process. Standardised questions. Risk assessment. Question 1. Based on the information you have, is the individual at immediate risk of causing harm to themselves or others? If yes, contact your supervisor, who will in turn contact the relevant agency, e.g. the Guards or HSE. If no, or unsure, proceed to next question. Question 2. Does the individual demonstrate one of the following? A. Behaviour which raises concerns for the welfare of the individual. B. Behaviour which may indicate the existence of a mental health difficulty. C. Has a known or disclosed mental health difficulty. If yes, or unsure, proceed to next question. If no, no referral required.
Question 3. Is the tenancy or housing application being negatively affected or at risk of being negatively affected within the near future? If yes or unsure, proceed to next question. If no, no referral required. Responsibility assessment. Question 4. Can you or your organisation act on this concern to reduce the risk? If yes, proceed to next question. If no, signpost the tenant or applicant to the appropriate agency or support for assistance. Action assessment. Question 5. Do you or your team require assistance from an appropriate staff member with welfare responsibilities to address the concerns? If yes or unsure, referral required. If no, no referral required, as appropriate action was taken at step 4.
Now we are going to look at how to apply the questions to a real-life scenario. A maintenance inspector has entered the tenant Carl's home to investigate some fire damage reported to the local authority by the tenant. The inspector observed the house was cluttered with a large amount of furniture and other items, to the extent that the inspector was unable to move freely around the dwelling. The entrance hall into the unit was barely passable, with items stacked on both sides, leaving only a narrow passageway. During the course of the inspector's conversation with Carl, he has claimed the fire occurred while he was drying his clothes in front of the fireplace in the sitting room. When asked if he had any other method of drying clothes, Carl explained that his gas supply was cut off due to non-payment of the bill. During the interaction, the inspector found it difficult to keep track of the conversation, as Carl's sentences were disordered and hard to follow. The inspector advised Carl that a contractor would call to fix the damage the following morning. The inspector also asked Carl to move the clutter, so the contractor could have clear access to that area in the morning to carry out the repairs. When the contractor called the following morning, Carl had not cleared the area, and became hostile with the contractor when they refused to carry out the repairs. The contractor reported this to the inspector, and advised they would not call to the house again without being accompanied by a local authority staff member. There are several concerns in this case, including health and safety issues, budget management, difficulty in managing household tasks, and damage to the property. The condition of the tenant's property is being negatively impacted by some or all of these issues. Without being addressed, there is a risk of another fire damage incident occurring at the property. We will now apply the standardised questions to this situation.
Risk assessment. Question 1. Based on the information you have, is the individual at immediate risk of causing harm to themselves or others? If yes, contact your supervisor, who will in turn contact the relevant agency, e.g. the Guards or HSE. If no, or unsure, proceed to next question.
In this case, the answer would be no, as Carl is not at immediate risk of causing harm to himself or others. so we will proceed to the next question.
Question 2. Does the individual demonstrate one of the following? A. Behaviour which raises concerns for the welfare of the individual. B. Behaviour which may indicate the existence of a mental health difficulty. C. Has a known or disclosed mental health difficulty. If yes or unsure, proceed to next question. If no, no referral required.
In this case, the answer would be yes, so we will proceed to the next question.
Question 3. Is the tenancy or housing application being negatively affected or at risk of being negatively affected within the near future? If yes or unsure, proceed to next question. If no, no referral required.
In this case, the answer would be yes, so we will proceed to the next question.
Responsibility assessment. Question 4. Can you or your organisation act on this concern to reduce the risk? If yes, proceed to next question. If no, signpost the tenant or applicant to the appropriate agency or support for assistance.
In this case, the answer would be yes, so we will proceed to the next question.
Action assessment. Question 5. Do you or your team require assistance from an appropriate staff member with welfare responsibilities to address the concerns? If yes or unsure, referral required. If no, no referral required, as appropriate action was taken at step 4.
In this case, the answer would be yes, so a referral is required. Using the standardised questions, we have established, number 1, that the individual is not at immediate risk of causing harm to themselves or others. Number 2, that the individual demonstrates behaviour which raises concerns. Number 3, that the tenancy is at risk of being negatively affected. Number 4, that you can take action to reduce the risk. Number 5, that you may require assistance from an appropriate staff member with welfare responsibilities to address the concerns. Now we will look at an example of an appropriate course of action to take in this situation. Step 1. The maintenance inspector should continue the normal procedures of dealing with difficulties arising with carrying out the repairs. Step 2. The inspector should forward his or her concerns to the appropriate section regarding the tenant's welfare and the difficulties experienced in carrying out the repairs. Step 3. A referral should be made to the most appropriate staff member or team with welfare responsibilities as per the results of the standardised question process. Now we are going to look at some techniques you might find useful in dealing with situations with tenants, which will allow you to support tenants more effectively. We will cover the following. Number 1, paralinguistics. Number 2, the 7 principles for effective verbal intervention. Number 3, setting limits.
Paralinguistics.
Paralinguistics are the aspects of spoken communication that do not involve words. It comprises of our tone, volume and speed. Tone. Avoid sarcasm, impatience or a patronising tone. Volume. Appropriate to the person and the place. Speed. Use an even rate and rhythm.
7 principles for effective verbal intervention.
How you respond to defensive behaviour is often the key to diffusing it. These 7 strategies will help you intervene in the safest, most effective way possible to avoid a physical confrontation. Be calm. If the person senses that you're losing control too, the situation will probably get worse. Remove bystanders. You will be more effective on a one-to-one basis than in a group setting. Watch your body language. Be aware of your use of space, posture and gestures. Do not get too close to the person and avoid gestures that could seem threatening. Keep it simple. Be clear and direct in your message. A person who is losing rational control will not be processing information as well as usual. Use reflective questioning. Put the person's statement in your own words and then check with them to see if you have understood what they meant. By repeating or reflecting their message in the form of a question, you give them an opportunity to clarify that message. Use silence. Silence is a very effective verbal intervention technique. Silence on your part allows the person to clarify their thoughts and restate their message. Watch your paraverbals. Paraverbal communication refers to the tone, volume and speed of your speech. Many identical statements can have completely opposite meanings depending on your paraverbals.
Setting limits.
You cannot force someone to behave in a certain way, but when you offer choices, you can teach and reinforce appropriate behaviour. Follow these steps to help someone make a positive behavioural choice. Number 1. Explain which behaviour is inappropriate. Saying, "Stop that," may not be enough. The person may not know if you want them to quieten down or stop swearing. Be specific. Number 2. Explain why the behaviour is inappropriate. Do not assume that the person knows why their behaviour is not acceptable. Are they disturbing others? Being disrespectful? Explain calmly. Number 3. Give reasonable choices and consequences. Instead of issuing an ultimatum, "Do this or else," tell the person what their choices are and what the consequences of their choices will be. Number 4. Keep it simple. Be clear and direct in your message. Avoid jargon and complicated choices. A person who is losing rational control will not be processing information as well as usual. Number 5. Be prepared to enforce your consequences. Set consequences that are reasonable, enforceable, within your authority, and within the policies and procedures of your organisation. Thank you for taking the time to watch this training video. This training video is to complement your organisation's existing protocols. We hope it helps you support tenants and applicants to prevent or reduce the negative housing outcomes.